Verse 256 follows on from the previous two verses, which were covered in the previous two videos. So if you haven't listened to them, it might be worth doing so. So verse 254 was about stepping beyond our moods. And the next verse, 255, was about how our moods determine our reality. They determine how we see the world. And I'm using moods here in a very fundamental sense. It's to do with our disposition, our psychological demeanour. That's how we see the world. We might be a left-wing type and see it in terms of Marxism. We might be scientific and see it in terms of science. Or we might be artistic and see it in terms of music. Or we might want to help people and see it about helping those less fortunate. Or we might just be somebody who sees the world as really awful and be completely disgusted by it and not want to have anything to do with it, and so on. All of these different ways of seeing the world, and many, many others, as religious ways of seeing the world, for example, they have nothing to do with how the world actually is. They're to do with our own demeanour, our own psychological disposition, or what I would call our own moods, particularly our fundamental mood tone. In the previous video I spoke about enlightenment events in your life. And how it's very likely there has been such an event, but you might not have recognized it. This is what happened to the Buddha. He didn't recognize the enlightenment event which happened to him as a teenager until he sat down under that tree and thought back. So we're thinking back to the enlightenment event, thinking back to the spirit of that event. And one of the obstacles is this fundamental tone, this fundamental mood tone. In remembering our enlightenment event, we need to be careful not to view that memory through this mood tone. Verse 256 tells us, when the Yogin, this is the enlightenment practitioner, enters upon mind only, he will cease discriminating an external world. Establishing himself where suchness has its asylum, he will pass on to mind only. So when the Yogin enters upon mind only, this is when the Yogin, when the enlightenment practitioner, when you remember your enlightenment event. And it's not about seeing the world in any way. It's not about deciding that the world is like this and it's not like that. This is when you'll cease discriminating an external world. So that is the actual fundamental discrimination that you give up as well, that there's actually a world out there. The world is a projection. It is a projection of our own fundamental tone. There is only here with a capital H. Everything is happening here. We project it out there and hypothesize something out there. But it's all happening here. You can understand this from a purely physical perspective. I've looked into this often enough in the past, so I won't go into it now. but all your senses are happening here. And so, as enlightenment practitioners, you come back to here-ness. You come back to here. This here-ness is described here as suchness. We're not concerned with projecting anything out there, because there is no out there. Out there is a construction and discrimination. Now, of course, part of you will be objecting to this, so let me just say that as far as everyday reality is concerned, we play along with that story of out there, and we engage with it in its own terms. But as enlightenment practitioners, we keep coming back, or we take every opportunity to come back to here-ness, to suchness. And in this way, we pass on to mind only. So this verse began with entering into mind only, establishing ourselves in suchness, or what I'd call here-ness. This is our asylum. And then we pass on to mind only. And I think what this means is we just become more established in mind only. There's no difference between mind only and suchness. Or, if we are inclined to make a distinction, it's like the distinction between what I'd call a sense of being and awareness. Again, there isn't really any distinction, just a slight alteration in how we might describe what is happening. So coming back to here-ness, removing ourselves from the terror of our own individual psychology, our own mood patterns, our own mood energy. We come back to a sense of being, which is otherwise continually being depleted, siphoned off. We come back to this sense of being, and we can realize that this is actually pure awareness. It's actually the attention when it's not being diverted into all sorts of stuff. It's the pure attention, pure awareness. This is what we pass on to. This is mind only. Verse 257 tells us, by passing on to mind only, he passes on to the state of imagelessness. When he establishes himself in the state of imagelessness, he sees not even the Mahayana. Now, like in video 102, I suggested an updated understanding of this term, imagelessness. And it was informationlessness. We have this urge to understand, this urge to gather facts. We have wonderful documentaries now. We have wonderful books with pictures and well-written articles in them. We have the immense trove of the internet. We can find out almost anything we want about anything. It's quite intoxicating. But we give up on this as enlightenment practitioners because, although from a conventional point of view there might be some worth as enlightenment practitioners, all of this is distraction. All of it is distraction. Even the Mahayana itself which is supposed to take us closer to the truth. The Mahayana itself is also a formulation, so we drop that. Occasionally we get verses which negate the Mahayana teaching, and this just means we have to let go of it. We let go of all teachings, we let go of all information, we let go of all understanding. We let go of all pictures that we have about the world. This is imagelessness. So we let go of all that, and we take asylum, we take refuge in here-ness, in suchness, in our sense of being, in mind only.